So I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to make a testimony. The two women that are here tonight are two of the bravest, most passionate, most committed, most hardworking people that we have. And they are so underappreciated. And I just want to say thank you to both Beth and Mauri for years and years of work of truth-telling, of standing up for the kids who need us to stand up for them most, and of being in our community and with these kids. I love you both, and I'm just grateful. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarita, and for 4 years I worked in the communications department at MPS, so I know both of these women up here. And I was not one of the people that told Mauri not to do the thing. So I just want to be clear about that. But my question is mostly for Mauri, but what advice do you have to communications people or district office people as far as understanding your position and where you're coming from and how we can best interact with and work with you?
Testing. Okay, that one's better. So this is definitely not so my answer is definitely not sanctioned, okay? I just want to be super honest about that. That I'm speaking on behalf of myself, Sarita, to your question. I think that in defense of that fear, I'm not sure that we have deeply and truly equipped educators in our buildings to interact with the media. And so I think that there are people like myself that are just like, I don't care. I'm going to say the same thing, whether Sarita's standing in front of me, whether Julie's standing in front of me, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be me and let the chips fall where they will. But I'm not sure that everyone feels that way. I'm not sure everyone has that same kind of level of deep rootedness. I think that what you have to do is you have to really identify just like a good teacher has to do in their classroom, really identify the strengths and weaknesses with the students in their room. I think you need to know the building leaders that you have and know who's comfortable with what. I will say, and I'm taking advantage of the fact that I have the microphone right now. I will say that, to Beth's point about social media, I actually see all of us in a position of journalists right now. I think that there are the certified journalists like Beth and others, but I think all of us have I think all of us need to feel a little bit morally compelled about the stories that we're telling and the stories that we're retelling. And so I think if you begin to interact and interface with the educators in your building, the principals, the teachers, the parents, the students, you find out who feels comfortable interacting and interfacing with the media, then you're able to kind of filter that out a little bit more. I also think that there is something plaguing schools in America right now, and that is just a very deep level of mistrust, almost to the point where, and my assistant principal, Lisa, hears me say this all the time, I think to myself sometimes, the way that I am led, I am shocked that anyone trusts me with any children. And I mean shocked. Like, I am led sometimes in a way that as a principal, and sometimes I feel like my teachers are led in a way that there is no way that they could have ever gone to school or gone to learn how to be a teacher or a principal. It is almost like life itself has to be scripted out for you. It is almost like you have to just read these lines and you can never go off. And we wonder why we're losing good and strong educators today. They've been robbed of all creativity, innovation, and autonomy. And so if we are afraid of letting them even pick a good book to read with their kids, then there's no way that we would trust them with the media. So I also think it comes down to trust.
Good evening. My name is Bernadette Johnson, former superintendent of Minneapolis Public Schools. I'm happy to be here tonight, but Mauri, love you dearly, but not all leaders are created equally. And I want to just say that you must have trust with the individual and the leader. And I have to tell you, I think, Beth, I called you and said, can I talk to you? I'm quitting. I gave you the news before I told anybody else, besides maybe Steve List. And that's all because of respect and trust. And that's because there's this reciprocity that takes place where I know your heart, I know your mind, and I know your soul. And I've had the opportunity to experience that with both of you. It's a love fest, I have to say that. I also have to say that I know that the work that you do has been challenging, and I don't feel like me as a leader always appreciated and thought about how I not only can make my own self vulnerable, which I've seen Mauri model just marvelously, because I was always so afraid. And I think it comes with courage. This work comes with courage. And I always feel like, what are they thinking about the black woman now? And that's real, you guys, so don't miss it. And it's not lost on me how leaders who follow me and other folks are treated differently than I've been treated. And I just feel like we must talk about what's going on in public education to understand it. Beth has done a great job. Okay, how much time do I have up here? Beth has done a great job of doing a chronology of what's happening. And just like you see in politics, if there's an absence of media, an absence of transparency and accountability, which I thought she thought about constantly, then we won't get to it. And so as a superintendent, I'm dismayed by when I see the results come out and we're explaining the system and not really telling the people what's going on. It's disrespectful of the people that we're serving, and until we do better, and I'm trying to keep my space. Mauri, I'm on watch too, you know, so like you're saying, you got your blinders, you're trying to make sure you represent Mauri. I stand to you before you today as an African-American female leader who was in the fight, in the battle, and feel like I lost it. And I want you to know that I also feel that I have to be cautious about what I say as an educational leader. But you have given me the courage again tonight, watch out Twitter, to make sure that I stand for what I know and believe is right. And I hope you do too, and I hope you don't leave here being Minnesota nice. I used to use the word interesting. One of my students told me, that's a Minnesota nice word. It means you don't have a thought, you don't know what you're talking about. So even the words we use. So I'm happy to be here tonight. I brought my friend with me, Benice Young, who is a principal on the North Side. We have been in the trenches, and we both went to the collaborative educator program. But I used to tell Steve, listen, I'm going to sit my ass down. I'm not in school or church, and I can cuss. I said, Steve, listen, don't come and tell me one more damn thing that's going on. I don't want to see you. You may be my lawyer, but I don't care. So I'm sitting down, I'm embarrassing my friends, and they're like, this is why Bernadette should not have a cocktail. But thank you for what you do, and thank you for what you continue to do. And you can't work and live your life and your job as if you're going to lose it the next day, because I guarantee you, you're going to lose it. And somebody else, you will find other opportunities to make a difference. So power to you. Lead on, women, courageously.
Thank you. Adia, do you mind if I respond to something Bernadette said? So there was a couple things, Bernadette, that you said that I just kind of want to point out. Beth alluded to something earlier that made me think of a lot of what you'll hear today when it comes to public education. So a number of people are referring to public education and the quote-unquote achievement gap, or the disparities, especially between white children and Black and Native children, as the civil rights issue of our time. Okay, and Beth talked a little bit about data and looking at data, And so there's a couple things that I want to say to you tonight, and this may not get claps and snaps, but I feel like when you preface something with that, it almost like it helps you brace yourself. Okay. The thing about looking at data, and the thing about having conversations about racial disparities, that is really important for me to say, is that if you follow like Claude Steele's work around stereotype threat, and you read some of that deep psychological analysis out of Stanford University, every single time that you have a conversation about racial disparities, especially in education, and every single time that you acknowledge and you identify how well white children are doing in our public education system, you are reinforcing, you are building back up. You have to be very careful, because what I have found to be true after 22 years of this work is that the power infrastructure that we have built that continues to inflate and reinflate the heads and minds of white people in our country is more important than even the mighty dollar. Do you know that in my experience in the state of Minnesota, even though we know and understand the implicit and explicit bias in how we measure intelligence, even though we know and understand that years ago when we all did a collective gasp, that preschool children of color, especially African American children in poverty, were coming with thousands less words to school. But it was proven just a year later that they weren't coming with thousands less words, they were coming with thousands different words. But it was the different words that they were never getting credit for any type of intelligence or literacy, because they spoke a different dialect and they had different words for the same things. We are telling children from the very beginning who is smart and who is not. We are defining intelligence in a racially superior way. And just like bystanders who watch people get bullied, we as a society are doing the same thing. Children in America, especially African American and Native American children, are feeling destroyed before their first test. This is our responsibility. And in the state of Minnesota, in my 22 years, rather than go look at the MCA that is measuring the children's quote-unquote intelligence, I am in a place where millions of dollars would rather be thrown my way. Do you know that millions of dollars would rather be thrown my way to hire more people to give the same test to the same children than to take a look at the test itself? Because we could, quote unquote, be modifying or adapting expectations. So when you are a person of color in this reality, the madness of it becomes beyond your comprehension. So it is not about you failing or quitting. Sometimes it becomes about trying to preserve the littlest bit of sanity in a completely insane reality. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. So Bernadette, I always said at least I kept you out of jail, which was, I know it's a low bar, but some of your colleagues didn't have as good a representation. I just also wanted to echo the bravery that I saw in Mauri in my time at the district. There was a time she came with her community to the board to protest the lack of funding to her school. And there were people in the administration who were like, well, she should be on our team as the administration. What's she doing at the board meeting? And what I saw her doing was what some of our principals in our more affluent schools would do, but they would just kind of push their community there. They wouldn't show up. But with the community that you represented, you were there to be the empowerment of that community. And I so admired you for it all the time. I did also want to talk about the media and when we had a reporter, because again, when I came to work at the district, people would complain because Steve Brandt was there all the time, and he knew the budget better than our administrators, better than our board, and could ask those tough questions. And I always felt the solution was not to keep him out of the building, but to know it better than he knew it. And that is what kept us accountable. And it is something that apparently now we're missing. And Mauri, I mean, you touched on it, and you touched on some of the structural racism that you deal with, the community deals with. Do you have any other thoughts, or Beth, on how to get out of the situation we're in today with the state of public education?
Okay, so we talk a lot about the flaws with the data and the data collection, right? And that's all real. And if you went to my professional development, you would learn things like how to get into the room where the cut scores are set, because they're political. How many kids are going to pass the test is a political decision that's made after the tests are administered and before the results are released. You would learn some of the tricks about how to figure out what kind of bias is in the test, how to figure out what's actually being tested, that stuff. What we don't talk about, and we really hate this discussion in Minnesota, and it's one of the reasons that you really should find a national publication to occasionally consult, is using that data to identify successes. We hate that discussion because the second you identify a success, everybody else feels dissed. It's true, right? We have data that is in fact racially explicit, such as around civil rights violations, racially disparate discipline. We have data that is not the MCAs, that is designed to get at some of these things. We can look at schools, we can find a school where those numbers have come down, and we can ask the educators in that school, what did you do? How did you bring the community in? How did you engage with them? We don't do that here. In fact, this year, and just like because I can see at least one other data nerd in the room, this year we didn't see in our newspaper of record the list of schools that had both very high levels of poverty and high levels of student growth. What we got was something called a regression analysis. Who knows what? Okay, we got two people who know what a regression analysis is. How useful is that to a newspaper reader? It's not. Okay, well, it's, you can't look at a regression analysis and go find somebody who is getting outstanding literacy rates and ask them what they did. We have decided that the data is fearful, and there are good reasons to fear it. And again, I would pitch that this is a reason why you want reporters who've been on the job more than 18 months, is because you want them to understand what the data does and does not signify. But we can study the data for successes.
I think I would add, Steve, to your question. So I do believe that, I believe a couple of different things. So I do believe that these upcoming elections are very important. The commissioner of the Department of Education is set by the governor. So I think that people should be really clear about how they're voting and who they're voting for and where education falls as a priority for that. I would argue and push for legislation around how we identify quote unquote failing schools. The way that the law is currently implemented and interpreted is that there will always be a failing schools list. They're the lowest performing 5%. So just to be a data nerd here for a second. So in the state of Minnesota, we will always identify the lowest performing 5% of the schools in the state of Minnesota. If you follow the state of Minnesota data, then you will see that the African American and Native American cell group populations are always the lowest performing cell group populations, quote unquote. And so therefore it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that schools that are made up mostly of Native and African American children will always be on the lowest performing schools list. And so it's this ugly and embarrassing cycle that continues to happen year after year, that people go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that school's back on the list again. And yet with no deeper dive to that. So I would really encourage people to pay attention to the elections this November and where people stand on identifications of schools.
I think we have time for one more. Oh, should we go? Two more. We'll get you in.
Hi, my name's Kira. I work at the Graves Foundation. I'm going to start by trying to say, perfect segue. Thank you, Mauri. There is a school board candidate forum next Monday, and I hope that everyone in this room, because you chose to come out today, you care about education in our city enough to come out again next Monday and bring a friend. This is often the race on the back of the ballot that no one knows anything about, next to the judges and the school and the park board, and maybe you know more about those two things, but we know how this works. You flip it over and you're like, oh, that name looks familiar. That's not how we should elect people. We know that elections matter. If you're not paying attention to that right now, then I mean, who are you and why are you here? Elections matter just as much, and the values that drive our public schools are the same values, like from federal government all the way down to the classroom. So transparency and governance and accountability matter just as much here in Minneapolis Public Schools. But if you asked your neighbor who you're voting for school board, they probably don't know. So I would beg you to come because it's your civic duty, and I shouldn't have to beg you. And on that note, I'm actually going to ask a question, which is, tell us more about how leadership matters. Because I just don't think that the general Minneapolis public, only 20% of whom have actual K-12 age students, know why the school board matters, how that relates to the superintendency, and how that relates to both your job as the principal of a school and your job as someone who's the fourth estate bringing us the truth. Thanks.
I think you should all go to the school board forum next week, and I think you should inform yourselves, and I think you should talk to your friends and neighbors about your choice. And now I'm going to say something really cynical. I'm growing in suspicion that a locally elected board that appoints a superintendent can do courageous change. I've seen too many boards try and back away from courageous decisions. I've seen too many superintendents mealy-mouthed by their own leadership within the district, by their board members. I feel like Minneapolis Public Schools right now has some incredible technical talent and some incredible leadership, and I don't expect them to be able to do anything. I think that it's time to start thinking out of the box. I think that the research is really mixed on appointed boards, but there are people who are thinking about other governance structures that would enable people who want to make change to be insulated. Did you know there are districts in this country where boards are elected by 1% of the electorate? Minneapolis is higher than that. St. Paul, I think the last one was 7%. That's not democratic. I mean, we think of an election as a democratic thing. That's not democratic. And it always puts the people who are trying to push change for kids at the behest of folks who might or might not be capable of representing their constituents in a positive way. Are we going to get what I want tomorrow? No, so you should go to the candidate forum.
I would say, and I feel bad for Director Walzer, who's standing over here to our left with like the last question, and I know, and then we have to answer this. So I'm just gonna go like this, the way I answer the question. I would say that I had an experience. I worked for about 1.5 years at our central office, and it was one of the most tragic experiences of my professional career. I had no idea that all my years in schools and in classrooms really came down to that level of chaos and confusion. And it was a very painful reality check for me. It was scary to see how much of everything we did every day was at the bequest and whim of a board member. I had no idea that you didn't know when you walked into the building that day, it depended on which board member was calling who the longest and the most, and that set your work for the day, and that was very difficult pill for me to swallow. So Kira, I applaud you for taking this serious, who the board members are. Beth, I don't know how the system or structure is set up for success or for failure, but I do know that who sits in those seats, regardless of what the rest of you may think on the outside, they are driving the ship on the inside. Absolutely.
Thank you. Last question.
Sorry, Bob.
Thanks for the setup. That was great. So I'm Bob Walzer. I'm a member of the Minneapolis Board of Education. And I'd like to piggyback on a couple of points that you made and part of what you said to bring it back actually to the media question specifically. When you talked about trust and when you talked specifically about when you used the example of the vocabularies and how so many of the instruments that we use to measure education are culturally biased and embedded in a particular worldview and privilege that worldview, that's a super important point. And your point about trust and trusting our educators, our experienced people who have the only access to the direct knowledge of our students to be able to meet their needs, and to not trust them seems absolutely crazy to me. That relates, in my mind, to a narrative, an understanding of how education works. And this is the challenge for you. Because I think there's a widespread notion that we can force education, that we can decide what kids will learn and when they will learn it. And at least in my experience in a classroom, which is not enormous, but it's significant, the only person that gets to decide when they're going to learn something is the student. There's a huge history of progressive education in America, starting going back to John Dewey and before, running through Maria Montessori, on through other people that we could name if we wanted to. That tradition of education, of progressive education, is absent in the media. It's never raised. The notion that we can have standards and accountability which are culturally biased but apply them across the board is a failed notion in my view. And I'm wondering, what is the role of the media in educating all of us to a wider possibility for education than the very narrow one that the legislature enforces on us through ESSA and other crazy rules that the legislatures make? So that's my question to you.
So ESSA is a creature of the federal government.
Before you begin, Beth, I just want to say try to keep it quick.
Short?
Yeah.
I did that.
So I think we just heard that kids don't learn because kids don't want to learn. What did you guys hear? Okay. I think that what we do discuss when we discuss a school where a population of children who are historically underserved are succeeding is that there are multiple ways to reach those children, and that there are some schools that are doing it pretty well. Some of them are not in this community. I personally feel that over the last 10 years, we have had so much defensiveness within public education about the need for change that this is it's a charged conversation. It's a radioactive conversation. Y'all should go home tonight and read Emily Hanford of American Public Media's story on why we are failing to teach children to read. I believe that Minneapolis just adopted a curriculum that fails to meet the scientific standard for teaching children to read. And it's because we believe that that is how it should be done and how it is done. And I honestly think that if reporters were in the boardroom while this was being discussed, we would be having a different conversation because we'd be challenging the factiness of these assertions.